Hello, everyone. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You're quite audible.
Okay. Okay.
So,
How
shall
are
we?
you,
Hi,
Arju?
Atul. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. How are you doing?
What does one say in these times, right?
Yeah, interesting times. So,
To say the least.
So, shall we begin, sir?
yes, I mean, you want to wait for people to join, or you want to? I mean, it's up to you.
Yes, okay, sir. Welcome everyone to the next lecture. This lecture of our intervention series, Farm Laws, Dissent in Democracy: Some Issues for India's Democracy and Development Paradigm, by Professor Atul Sood. Before we start the program, may I request all of you to kindly keep your microphones on mute during the duration of the talk. And I request everyone to type in your queries in the chat box after the talk. We will read them out for the speaker. I request Professor 𝐃𝐄𝐈𝐒𝐒, Chairperson KCHR, to please take over the proceedings.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Yes, Michael, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can't see anybody. I presume that I'm being heard. I should.
So you're quite audible, sir.
Welcome, Professor Atul Sood. Yeah, but I'm saying that I can't. Normally,
Is there a connectivity problem?
I can see you people, no? So I'm not able to do that. I don't know why.
There seems to be a bit of a
Anyway,
problem.
that doesn't matter.
Michael, your voice is breaking.
Since you can hear me, why don't you go ahead and why don't you go ahead and hold the meeting?
Rachel, what should we do?
I'll try to get in some or other.
I think there's some problem with the chairperson's connection. So let me just introduce the speaker. Our speaker today in the interventions series is Professor Atul Sood. For those of you who are joining, especially from JNU, Atul Sood requires no introduction. Professor Sood has been a professor in the Center for the Study of Regional Development in JNU for the past decade and a half or more, actually. And he has been researching and teaching on different aspects of different kinds of institutions in India, and his work on poverty, his work on the Punjab crisis have all been extremely significant. He has been concerned about the political economy of India, questions about labor relations, demonetization, and the larger questions of labor in India. I would actually just also add, again, a fact that is known certainly to people within the teachers movement, and in the context of JNU, of course, students and teachers know that Professor Sood was our Teachers Association president from 2018 to 2019, and his presence there as a leader of the most significant opposition of this time, which is from in higher education, which is from the teachers and students, was led very ably by him. So he has a very, very good all-rounded understanding of what it means to think about both politics and the economy. We asked him today to speak in response to the farm bills that were introduced. I will not say any more. I think we should just hear from Atul what he has to say about this. So over to you, Atul.
Thanks, Arunima. Thanks for asking me to come and speak on this platform. It's a chance for me to put my thoughts together on an important issue that has been that the country has been witnessing for the last many months. What I wish to do today is to make my argument in two major parts or two segments. First, actually, I want to talk about I'll take about 20 minutes in the first part, which is to look at the title of today's conversation is Farm Laws, Dissent and Democracy. And what I want to do is to spend the first 20 minutes to understand the farm laws. Essentially, what I would try to do, and the remaining time would be to understand the protest and the implications of that protest. Now, when I want to talk about the farm laws, I just want to do a couple of things, essentially two things. I want to talk about what these laws are, and in particular, what these laws mean in terms of our understanding about agriculture in this country. Number two, I want to talk about is how these laws are part of a continuum from the past, particularly in the context of the larger macroeconomic policy. I also want to touch upon why these laws were introduced and why was the mechanism of approval of these laws, which is well known to all of you, was chosen. So that's what I want to do in the first segment. And in the second segment, I would want to look at and try and understand the farmers' protest. And since a loud voice has come, particularly from Punjab in the beginning of this protest, I'd focus on Punjab and look at and make observations about how do we understand this movement? Was it spontaneous? Who all are protesting? Why are they protesting? How this protest is located in the larger sort of political economy of agrarian change in Punjab, the question of land and labor, and how that agrarian, political economy of agrarian change has contributed to these farmers and the agricultural laborers, the men and women from Punjab, to reach the borders of Delhi. I would also want to touch upon the history of protest in the recent years in particular, and locate the conversations that you hear about, there are 32 unions and 40 unions and so on, how these unions are located in the agrarian crisis, and how and why these unions are actually coming out of the specificities of agrarian change and less sort of, rooted in the social life based on caste, region, or other identities. And then finally, briefly in a minute or two, conclude about what this protest and these laws bring to us in terms of, how do we move ahead, or what does it mean for us who are, looking at it as an important resistance movement in this country in the recent years. So let me, and I wouldn't mind if, Arunima or one of you could just tell me, the 20 minutes so that I can, divide the segments, very clearly and don't need to rush at the end.
Sure,
So let me first begin by saying what these laws are. And, as I said, I also want to talk about what these mean for agriculture. This is something that, most people who are here are very informed and would understand. But let me quickly sort of, give my take on this. We are talking about here three legislations. Now, despite the, the long and complex titles, highlighting farmers rather than focusing directly on farmers' welfare. All three bills overwhelmingly focus on supply chain actors to take advantage of the new rules and share the gain with farmers. So that's one component. The first bill relaxes the restrictions governing the purchase and sale of farm produce. The second one relaxes the restrictions on stocking under the Essential Commodities Act. And the third one introduces a dedicated legislation to enable contract farming based on written agreements. The three bills need to be read together because they share a common premise. And the premise is that they will enable private players to invest in agriculture food supply chains more easily, lead to gains in efficiency downstream along the supply chain and upstream in the input supply chain, and that these gains will be passed on to the farmers in the form of higher output prices or lower input prices, as the case may be. I'm not saying that all of this is achievable or they are real goals, but that is the framework connecting the three legislations. Just to give you in perspective, and I myself did not know that, this point that I'm making about that they enable private players to invest, and who are these private players? Of course, the farmers' protest has brought clearly, the two big houses, but essentially what are these private players doing? I mean, what are their stakes and, at what scale and, what level they exist? I found an interesting report just to get a perspective on these private players, a Forbes report 2017, where, it brings out how agriculture tech firms in India have been in the waiting room, literally eager to join the action for some time now. And the report says that there's a lot of activity in agriculture, but no clear winners yet. It continues to say, it's hard to say who might become the Facebook or Amazon of the scene. So the report then talks about, 2 billion, fact that 2 billion or more people are living on this planet, and what is the scale of opportunity and what is the scale of investment that is feasible. And then it talks about 25 most innovative, biotechnology and, new technology areas in agriculture, and which are the big companies that are involved in it. Located in that report is an interesting fact that agriculture tech startups have proliferated in India, and some estimates suggest that 1 in 9 agri-tech startup worldwide is established in India, relying on venture capital to rapidly scale up their business and impact. A 2019 NASSCOM report asserts that India's agriculture tech startups by June 2019 had raised funding to the tune of 248 million compared to 73 million in 2018. More than 60% of this funding was directed to those working on market linkages, and the remaining was on crop advisory services and input and other key areas. So that's one aspect of the private enterprise. The second is this, what we call these days the social enterprise, which are centered on producer well-being, which are also called in the legislation the FPOs, the farmer producer organization, or what I would call in quotation marks the new age cooperatives. 2013, the government of India came up with an FPO policy. Ministry of Agriculture is the one that registered them. And I just read one of the clauses in the provisions there. It says, by suitable amendments in the APMC Act to allow direct sale of farm produce by the FPOs at the farm gate, through FPO-owned procurement and marketing centers, and for facilitating contract farming arrangements between FPO and bulk buyers. So basically, this thinking had started way back in 2013, and I'm already giving you numbers of 2018, 19, of how it. The third component of these private players are these organized retail companies, which are rapidly growing. Traditional grocery stores modernizing, making backward linkages with the producers, and so on and so forth. All of this is being studied with new kind of consultancy organization. I located an interesting one. It's called the Mixing Bowl Foundation, and the vision of the Mixing Bowl Foundation is a very interesting one. Gives us a perspective on how private players are being looked at in agriculture. It says connecting people who are feeding the world with people who are changing the world through tech innovation. So all I'm suggesting is that agriculture tech and agriculture private business interests have are really a very powerful, very broad-based, and a dominant interest group, which has been active and which has been pursuing avenues and opportunities for itself. And the legislations that we have seen recently, which I summarized in terms of their orientation as enabling the private players to invest in the supply chains that I talked about, have a deep basis in how things have been changing in the last couple of years. Now, if you look at the specificities of three bills, the first one, which is called the Farmers Produce Trade Commerce Protection Facilitation Bill 2020, the bill has been very aptly named in the literature these days. It's called the APMC bypass bill, though actually it is not the APMC bill at all, but it's called the APMC bypass bill because the intent of the bill is to basically limit the oversight of AMC and limit the jurisdiction of APMC to the market yard. So outside of the market yard, the bill, the new legislation entitles free to transaction in agriculture produce, what has been referred to as trade area. Transactions in the trade area are free of any obligation to pay a fee to the APMC. No licenses are required by buyers. These trade areas across the country is expected to construct an alternative market space that will create this interlinked, seamless market across the country. The bill also talks about facilitating a framework for electronic trading. And the bypass bill thus permits electronic trading platforms, permitting trade areas, electronic platforms, taking away control from state governments, since state no longer will have jurisdiction over these new trade, the e-trading entities. We all also know the background of these legislations. I'm not going to go into it. 60s, the APMC mandis came. They were introduced to ensure that farmers had access to organized markets. And it was thought at that time that the markets had the benefit of oversight by the government to minimize the risk of exploitation by traders and middlemen. It's also acknowledged very well in the literature that over time, the system that was designed in the 60s and evolved in the last 30, 40 years, all with good intentions, deteriorated and vested interests took over. It perversely rendered farmers dependent on middlemen. Trade in APMC market is in fact auction or tendered in closed bid to the highest bidder, but the nexus between traders and commission agents tends to keep out competition and often leaves the farmer with little bargaining power. Many studies on agricultural markets document non-transparent price discovery process, often through collusive trading behavior or hoarding. Research on agriculture markets also talk about how these markets have been inefficient. They are characterized by high level of wastage, large variations across states in terms of the scope and stringency of these law acts or the working of the APMC acts, leading to fragmented markets, impeding the emergence of a national market. So all I'm suggesting from this is that there is a clear acknowledgement in the literature, and many committees and reports exist in terms of the challenges that the APMC proposed. The point to be made is that the proposed APMC bypass bill does not promise to achieve any of the claims it is claiming to address. There is no, in the current APMC bypass bill, there is no obvious mechanism by which a single market will emerge. Emergence of many electronic platforms that are disconnected with each other would imply rather fragmentation rather than unification. Also, when they talk about new trade areas, private players where they operate normally tend to look to the APMC market to guide their transaction prices outside the mandi. Now, if players in the trade areas continue to use APMC markets to guide the prices they pay, then APMC will continue to influence the prices in the new trade areas as well. In this case, saving the mandi fees may be an outcome, but private players will not be able to provide any meaningful alternative to the APMC mandi. So by creating the two markets, that won't come. So the non-transparent price discovery mechanism in the APC, which is the complaint against the APC, the new bill does not address. It doesn't break the existing current practices. If, on the other hand, the APMC's decline in importance as a result of this legislation and influence and cease to offer a reference price, then what replaces APMC as the source of price signal becomes even more significant question. So the outcome of this system looks disturbing in terms of the structure that it replaces. The three bills, actually, it's significant to see what they do not do rather than what they claim to do. In general, all the three bills lack transparent recording of transaction and a credible regulatory architecture. All three bills collectively invisibilize trade area transactions, contract farming and stocking in a way that makes them unregulatable. So there is complete absence of regulation and regulatory oversight for both the new trade areas and the new electronic platforms that might emerge as the implementation of this bill. Quick reference to the the dairy legislation in 1991, deregulation, when no regulation was proposed, it caused great chaos in the dairy market, and therefore in 1992 the government came up with a regulatory framework called the Milk and Milk Products Order in 1992. So there is an experience there that deregulation without proposing an alternative regulatory mechanism, or changing the existing structure without proposing an alternative regulatory mechanism, has its problem. It is also unclear from the current proposed bill how multiple regulatory systems will coexist and function. The current APMC bypass bill talks about all existing trading places, both private market yards and warehouses, that have been declared as market places under the APMC Act. So basically, under the APMC Act, private market yards as well as the APMC mandis, which exist till this legislation was proposed, or till the time this legislation is implemented, would fall under the APMC Act. That's why states like Rajasthan and others have come into ordinances so as to retain control over a larger share of the market within the state, within the ambit of the APMC. So a fragmented regulatory structure will be a huge disincentive for private players, though larger businesses may be better placed to navigate the regulatory complexity. The bill uses transparency word several times, but there is no clear mechanism to record, collect, collate data, renders all transactions in the new trade areas invisible. Entire marketing system proposed in the bill is opaque. There is no obligation for anyone in the trade area to record or report details of the transaction. The sole proof of transaction lies in the receipt that the farmers are supposed to get upon delivery, which is left entirely to the buyer, and ability of the farmers to demand and insist on one. That's where the regulation ends. It invisibilizes stock holdings, given that registration and reporting are not mandated, unlike those registered warehouses under the Warehouse Development and Regulatory Authority today. Another big weakness of the legislation is the dispute resolution mechanism, much talked about. It is developed at length both in the bills and in the rules, but it is weak, putting the onus virtually entirely on the farmers. Indeed, the basis of dispute resolution mechanism relies on the receipt the farmer receives as a proof of his transaction and on the sub-divisional district magistrate rather than civil courts. So it's unclear how this will resolve interstate dispute over complex issues such as quality, weight, etc., on the basis of a receipt, or of more complex issues relating to electronic platforms. The dispute resolution process for the contract farming is not credible recourse for the farmer for the reasons that have been, again, well identified in the literature. So these lacunas are worrying, and they might as well not translate into any benefit that the government hopes, or for worse, may put farmers at a deep disadvantage. Even uneven and ineffective implementation notwithstanding, I must also make clear that APMC even today is not the monopoly purchaser of commodities. With the growing diversification of products and diversity of market players, non-APMC channels have been increasing their share of purchase in the market. 2012-13 data suggests that only 25% of all transactions in India during 12-13 passed through these mandis, whereas 56% were sold to private traders. So why I'm giving these numbers is that there is already a detailed experience and evidence in front of us to see that when these multiple markets operate, to what extent they address, they remove the shackles that the bills claim that they would be removing for the farmers. It seems that the proposed bill does not draw upon this experience at all, and therefore is unlikely to bring about the gains it claims. The bill certainly incentivizes private players to directly transact with the farmers, no doubt about it. At the same time, the history of agribusiness engagement suggests that there are strong placement effects. Businesses are highly selective in which geographies they work. That's the existing evidence, in often choosing areas with less competition, better infrastructure, skilled farmers, and higher productivity. Many agribusinesses also select larger farmers rather than smallholders to reduce transactions cost of operations. Small and marginal farmers often sell to input dealers, traders, and other supply chain actors at far lower than market price, because the transport cost of visiting a mandi simply does not make an economic sense. So for all these groups and for all these reasons, it's unlikely that these bills it will lead to any expansion in the potential buyers for the farmers, which is one big claim of this legislation. The absence of private players on account of systematic disadvantages of operating in certain geographies rather than regulatory barriers appears to be the overwhelming evidence from India, from all the research that is available on agriculture markets. So I repeat and underline that the absence of private players on account of systematic disadvantages of operating in certain geographies appears to be more deeper reason or more important reason rather than regulatory barriers. And the bill does not address the former, but just addresses the latter. So the need of the hour, therefore, would be, if you look at the evidence and research on agriculture markets in India, not to privilege greater private participation at the expense of the APMC, especially when private business is already an important component of India's agriculture trading. But the need of the hour perhaps is to strengthen public marketing infrastructure and systems, which is completely demolished by this. The second bill, the second legislation talks about the essential commodities. We know that, the provision is that the central government declares which commodities, this is the 1995 Act. The central government, has wide-ranging powers to impose restrictions on shortage and movement of essential commodities by private parties, mainly to protect consumer interest. And the state governments are free to set the stock limits based on the center's notification. So there is both. The center identifies and the stock limits are set up by the states. And this law has been seen as draconian for many reasons, that it does not help private investment in storage, warehousing, processing, and so on and so forth. So the Essential Commodities Amendment Bill 2020 attempts to remove the arbitrariness and unpredictability in notifying the stock limits by linking it to a transparent rule-based price triggers. That's interesting, the important word. Transparent rule-based price triggers. The restrictions will be deployed under the new act only in exceptional circumstances. The bill suggests that for horticulture production, stocking limits can be invoked if there is a 100% increase in retail price and 50% increase in retail price of non-perishable agriculture foodstuff using a base price. The base price would be a retail price in the preceding 12 months or the average retail price of the last 5 years, whichever is lower. And anyone who works on prices would know how complicated this would be and how much scope of arbitrariness is involved in choosing the retail price. And the legislation becomes, the exceptional situation arises only if there's a 100% increase in retail price in horticulture and 50% increase in price of non-perishable agriculture foodstuffs. So this bill has, though, generated less controversy, but the removal of these limits, stocking limits, is being welcomed by large business that have found it to be a constraint in order to store goods. And already the farmers' movement has come out with so many facts of how private players have already got and created these huge stocking facilities all over the country. The third bill quickly is on contract farming. Since the APMC Act at the state level to govern all forms of marketing transactions, the decision on whether to permit contract farming was left to the state governments. So some states have allowed contract farming for years. Others implicitly continue to disallow it. In Punjab, an act was proposed for contract farming, and therefore it has been governed by a special legislative framework in Punjab. The Farmers Empowerment Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Service Bill, which is essentially this contract farming bill, aims to provide a framework for written agreements between farmers and sponsors without mandating them. So it allows sponsors to engage with farmers via written contracts.
Atul, it's 20 minutes.
Yeah, okay. All right. It's really bewildering that 2020 bill has completely broken up or created a disjunction between the abandoning of the 2018 proposed Model Contract Farming Act. So it's actually does not again draw upon the experience of the previous discussions on contract farming. The new effort, new legislation is a lighter framework that permits contract farming with minimal obligations, and there are issues in terms of what it does. Let me just, for lack of time, just say out the keywords. As far as the contract farming Indian experience is concerned, it's an unenviable experience. It has worked only for few niche commodities where competing domestic markets do not exist, and it has been operating in specific geographies. In reality, the legal framework for contracting has been largely immaterial to the agribusiness decisions, whether or not to contract or whether it takes a form of a written contract. So the existing contract farming bill is unlikely to encourage kind of contracting that it suggests. On account of small size of firms and small transaction volumes, it is immensely expensive for firms to contract with large number of smallholders. So many therefore prefer to contract with intermediaries who aggregate produce from farmers or to procure from APMC mandis themselves. The premise of the bill, both the parties are looking for written contracts. The existing research clearly suggests that the written contract is not something that has been sought after by either the farmers or by the contractors. The premise of the bill, as I said, is that the private players will pass on the benefits of lower cost and efficiency gain to the farmer while competing with each other. That itself is quite questionable as the reality of the Indian agriculture is concerned. It's most likely that high likelihood that new players will offer better access to markets to farmers, but it is eminently possible that this happens without leaving them significantly better off monetarily. So in terms of income gains to farmers, it's unlikely that it is going to give any income gains to farmer. If anything, the power imbalance between the large business and farmer is often far greater than between the local traders and farmers, and therefore likely to further worsen the conditions of the farmers in the trading market itself. The possibility of collusion by non-traditional buyers. The APMC mandi suffered from collusion, but the non-traditional buyers are also known for collusion, and it's not uncommon for buyers to carve up territories so as to step up on each other's toes, so that they do not step on each other's toes. So basically, carteling in the market is something that is enough evidence. There's another phenomena which is well identified in the literature, which is called agribusiness normalization, which is essentially saying that initially the cost saving by agriculture business are passed to the farmers, who then subsequently gradually squeeze them over time. So it's common that businesses end up consolidating. So whereas farmers enjoy the advantages of multiple buyers initially, but they end up facing a single buyer eventually. So these are the dynamics through which the three laws are going to give outcomes quite different from the claims about what these acts will do. The transfer of gains from these acts to the farmers, again, I'm skipping that section, but they do not bring any confidence that they will bring gains to the farmers in general as the markets function. Quickly on 2 points, in the first section itself that I wanted to touch upon, but I'll rush through them. One is the larger macroeconomic policy context in which these bills have been brought about, and why this mechanism for approval was taken. Let me just say these in bullet points. The government demonstrated its willingness to use COVID-19 crisis and the ordinance route to unilaterally push this reform without explicit involvement of the state government. The proceedings of the parliament have regrettably been vastly inadequate in highlighting the potential ramifications of the bill and in redressing many of the lacunas that these bills have. Now, why the government is not willing to withdraw these acts, to me, the essential reason is that it does not want the political discourse and the economic discourse to question the philosophy of these bills. So even though the discussions around the bills talk a lot about federal structure and the state government being bypassed and how the provisions of trading have been used to bring the legislation in the parliament, to me, that's not the fundamental issue. To me, the fundamental issue is this resistance to change the acts in order to defend the fundamental philosophy and principles on which is the foundation for bringing these bills in the parliament. They have a long history of how the thinking on these bills. There's a history of the Railway Revolution, the National Agriculture Policy talked about it. The Agriculture Produce and Livestock Marketing Facilitation Act 2017 had a framework for APMC. The Economic Survey talked about that if persuasion fails, then we will have to find other ways in terms of central government taking the lead. So ultimately, the central government has, after exploring all these avenues, have chosen as a culmination of a prolonged effort to change the regulatory environment of agriculture markets and to allow more room for private players while allowing farmers to connect with non-traditional private players in agriculture markets by bypassing the state. Now, why these laws and why these laws in great hurry? Number one, these laws, as the policy experts have been saying, reflects the stress that the expert or reflects the desire that have been underlined right from the Second Labour Commission onwards of this need to shift people from agriculture to provide cheap labor in manufacturing and service sector. So it is this shifting, creation of this reserve army, which is the compelling reason for implementation of this act the way it has been done. Several attempts through reform commissions and committees to do this has been unsuccessful, and COVID-19 provided the opportunity to do this. One of the key elements of the neoliberal reforms has been the control of land. And if you remember, when the BJP came to power in 2014, the first legislation it brought about was the Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act. There's a whole history of land legislation and changes in the land legislation. Essence of that was in order to the discourse was about registering of land titles, but the essence of the registration of land titles and the digitization was essentially to create a legal framework of land, which ultimately leads to a dispossession of land, number one. And number two, the way the registration process is to be initiated and is being initiated in a number of states, the tenants are going to be at the most biggest disadvantage. The other implication of the orientation of the land framework has been that it puts land reforms on the back burner in the political and the economic discourse completely. So that's the other compelling reasons why the legislation has been brought about the way it has been brought about. I mean, McKinsey's have been talking about lack of clarity in the Indian, lack of unclear status in terms of the land records in India, and 90% of the land titles are unclear, said McKinsey in its report in 2001. And since 2001, various efforts have been made for digitization, and the 2007 World Bank report claiming that traditional land reforms in India is no longer beneficial. And if I have to boost growth, we have to talk about expanded computerization, integration, use of textual records to ensure full coverage of land, and so on and so forth. Arvind Panigre, in his best-selling book, The Emerging Giant, called for state-guaranteed titles to land as a prerequisite for a higher efficiency in the land market. So the Congress-led UPA government in 2008 launched the National Records Maintenance and Records Modernization Program, NLRMP. What is interesting, and I want to share this, in April 2020, when we were all hit by the pandemic and the lockdown, at the height of that, the Prime Minister launched a new project called Swamitva. I just came to know about it while I was preparing for this. It's called the Survey of Villages and Mapping with Improvised Technology in Village Areas for drone surveys to map all residential houses in rural areas. Once this is done, state government will issue property card for these houses to village households. Apart from demarcation of individual rural property, other Gram Panchayat community assets like village roads, ponds, canals, open spaces, etc. would be surveyed and the maps would be created. So the interesting question to ask is, why did the government accord such an urgency to these schemes? The government claims that this would increase liquidity of land parcels in market. So in other words, facilitate sales of property. However, it is likely that having set up a sizable physical infrastructure and trained personnel for drone-based mapping in rural areas, the government may use it sometime later for mapping agricultural land as well. So the attempt is to change the titles from presumptive land titles to conclusive titling, where so far the state does not guarantee land titles. It's based on evidence of ownership. The attempt is that in the name of digitization and completion of records, we move towards property titles which are registered and guaranteed by the state. Once that happens, this will facilitate, the transactions in the land market far more at a greater pace and a greater spread across regions. So that's the other compelling reasons that, the drive for titling of land will ultimately lead to, it's a drive for dispossession in terms of the tenants, but it will also it will not remain limited to the dispossession only of the section of the peasants, but the fixing of these conclusive titles by the state will lead to a wider dispossession of land because of the greater transactions in the land market. There's also the global context of why these legislations have been brought about, but I would skip that section. Just last point about why these bills now. These bills, as I said, are continuum from the past in terms of the economic policy and the thinking on economic policy, but it's also a continuum as far as this government is concerned in reinforcing its particular way of governance. Two dimensions I want to highlight. If you remember, the different legislation that this government has brought about, Muslims do not understand the benefits of CAA. Economists do not understand the benefits of demonetization. Kashmiris do not see the benefits of repealing Article 370. Migrants do not understand the benefits of lockdown. Traders are not seeing the gains of GST. So you can see there is a continuous discourse here. And now the farmers are not understanding how this legislation will benefit them. So that's one sort of, larger political reasons which makes a difference for the sustenance of this regime and its larger social and political agenda, that these legislations have been brought about in the same manner as from the past, these changes have been brought about. The only difference is that this time the farmers have really challenged them. The second component of the governance framework that I want to underline, that in the same period as the farm laws were changed, important changes were made in the labor laws. And there is a common rationality being applied here. And the common rationality is that over-regulation and support of regulation by those who are saying that these, so to be specific, the support of labor and labor unions to seek continuance of regulation in the labor market is the reason for the poor conditions, living conditions of the labor. So over-regulation in the labor market is responsible for, the conditions that prevail in the labor market. Similarly here, over-regulation in the agriculture market and the support of these by so-called vested interests, that is those who are involved in the so-called stakeholders in the sector, are responsible for their poor economic conditions. And therefore, the key thing is that the responsibility for the agrarian crisis and the consequences of the agrarian crisis, and the responsibility for the mess in the labor market and the poor working conditions and high rates of unemployment and precarity of employment, conditions of employment in the labor market. For both these, labor is responsible, and in the other case, the agricultural community, the agricultural laborers and farmers are responsible. It's actually not a governance failure. So there is a new rationale of governance being built here, that it is our own thinking and our attempt to safeguard our rights based on the legislative frameworks that existed in the past is responsible for our poor conditions. And once these conditions were changed, of course, which we don't understand that how they are harming us, there will be benefits for for everyone. So too much regulation or the type of regulation supported by those who are suffering the negative consequences of these regulations is the source of problem, no government failure. And therefore, the government, for all these reasons, both for the economic reasons as far as the political and practical governance reasons, have pushed these labor laws in the manner that they have pushed for. Compelling needs of the needs of accumulation, both in agriculture and the needs for the private players to now seeking avenues of investment, the compelling needs of the global investors to get into agribusiness, the needs for the political management of this country or the governance framework of this country to meet the larger political agenda of its building a nation state of the kind it desires to build. All of these have added together to use COVID as an opportunity to push through these legislations in the agriculture sector and in the labor, as far as the labor is concerned. Let me come to the second section. I think I'm running about 10, 12 minutes late or more, maybe, Runima. I'll try and
Doesn't matter. Take your time, Atul. It's okay. So
the second segment I want to talk about, is it a spontaneous movement? Who is protesting and why? My conclusion, or the point that I want to make, is that it is not a spontaneous movement. It is based on years of and history of struggle of unions all over India, but in Punjab in particular. There's also the specificity of recent struggles in Punjab that have to be accounted for in order to understand the movement as it came to Delhi in the month of November. The movement has also to be understood in terms of how this history of farmers' resistance in Punjab is to be located in the political economy of agrarian change in Punjab. In other words, how these laws are located specifically in the region, and therefore how unions come in response to this agrarian crisis. In the context of Punjab, the success of technological revolution in Punjab has attracted great deal of attention, both by researchers and by policymakers. And initially there was some concern about that, since the peasantry was quite differentiated, the gains from the Green Revolution would not be equal to everyone. However, the success of the high-yielding variety overtook the narrative of differentiation. And by mid-70s, the gulf between the rich and the poor farmers grew. People's perception about these gaps in the living standard became noticeable. And there was then, some attempts to study and understand the process of Green Revolution and its implications in terms of different classes of peasantry. In 1980s, as a result of this understanding, some field-based studies pointed to big and middle farmers benefiting much more from the new technology as compared to the small and marginal farmers. So the small and marginal farmers, who form a majority of small holdings in Punjab, struggled to meet the demands of high-priced inputs and technology. Notably, about over 65% of the farmers in Punjab are small, with holdings of less than 4 hectares as per the Punjab State Farmers Commission 2006 and 7. The studies in mid-80s by Professor Bhalla and Chadha, though acknowledge that all Green Revolution gave benefits to all peasants, all size class of farmers. The benefits were reaped across the board, but they also admitted in their studies that 1/3 of marginal farmers and 1/4 of small farmers and 1/5 of medium farmers were living below the threshold levels of poverty in the state as whole. The Green Revolution technology also adversely impacted the condition of agricultural labor. Wage employment initially went up as a result of double cropping patterns, and money wages also increased. But as agriculture became more and more mechanized, labor got increasingly marginalized and unorganized. It became clear that there were no gains in real wages. The increase in real wages, where real value of wages was much smaller than the growth of output. During the period 1961 to 77, output went up by more than 2.5 times in its level in 1961, but real wages at best registered an increase of 15%. As far as women laborers in Punjab were concerned, not much work has been done, but Sheila Bhalla's analysis of real wages in 79 very few studies of women labor, concluded in 79 that between 61 and 77, the real wages of women farm workers increased somewhat till 67, but declined drastically later and never reached the 67 levels again. The real wages in cotton picking, where there were highest concentration of women workers, she concluded, based on an analysis of official data, were lower in 1977 than they were in early 60s. By the 1980s, the gains of technology had petered out further, and by early 90s, Punjab had plunged into a serious crisis. The yield of major agriculture crops stagnated. Additional increments in yield could rise only at a very high marginal cost. As a consequence, per hectare net return declined, pushing Punjab agriculture into crisis. The small farmers who have thus far managed precarious balance between high input cost and price of their produce came under heavy debts as food prices began to fall in the global food market. Tractors, tube wells, seeds, fertilizers, all brought on credit. On the policy advice coming from agriculture universities and aggressive marketing campaigns of private companies and banks, which became the millstones around the farmers' necks. Peasants plunged into deep indebtedness. NSSO 2005, average amount of outstanding loan in each farmer household was highest in Punjab amongst all major states in India. A little later, a large survey in 2012 found 89% of marginal and 91% of small farmers in the survey under heavy debt burden. The study also found debt per hectare inversely related to farm size, highest among the marginal farmers, followed by small and others. The crisis was evident in falling productivity, stagnating farm prices, rising cost of production, shrinking incomes and employment opportunities, and mounting debts. Desperate unemployed youth waited with bated breath for visas to migrate to other countries in search of jobs. As farming became unviable, large number of small and marginal farmers also began to move out of agriculture, leasing out land to bigger operators in what is called as reverse tenancy in Punjab. After the 90s, the number of small holdings have been steadily declining. Punjab is the only state in India where the size of operational holding is increasing in recent years. The all India trend is declining average size in operated holdings. During the 2000s, 128,000 smallholders leased out their land and moved out of farming, and 72,000 sold their land to large farmers. Of these 200,000 small peasants, about 22% joined the ranks of agriculture laborers or other laborers, as per the State Farmers Commission Report 2007. This is also the period when demand for agriculture laborers in the farm sector steadily declined, from 479 million man days in 1983-84 to 420 in 2000-2001 to 401 in 2009-10. In this process, land became further concentrated in fewer hands, consolidating the economic power of big landlords. The very same structure of growth which had pushed small and marginal farmers, creating a mass of landless laborers, is also creating big landlords in the region. Indebtedness and humiliation in the hands of the banks and commission agents pushed a large number of peasants towards suicides, particularly in Malwa and Bhatinda and Sangrur districts. In popular imagination, when we talk about suicides and agrarian crisis, it's all often understood as a crisis of the upper caste farming community. The increased debts, falling employment opportunities, stagnant wages, and household incomes also left Dalit landless agriculture laborer in deep crisis. A less known fact about suicides is by agriculture labor along with farmers. A study of farmer and agriculture labor suicides in Punjab Agriculture University, Ludhiana, for the government was released in 2009. Through a census conducted in two districts, Bhatinda and Sangrur, the study revealed that during the period 2000-2008, 2,890 suicides were committed by the farmers and agriculture laborers in these two districts, out of which 1,133 were agricultural laborers. So you can see that out of 2,819, about 1,133 were agricultural laborers. So these suicides, which were catching up the national imagination, also plunged households into deep crisis, and women were left to care for debt-ridden families. While Dalit widows who were already in the labor market had to work hard, the peasant landless widows struggled even more to feed their families. The peasant women of Punjab from small and marginal holdings is under severe strain, as is evident from the work that has been done. In the last few years, the funerals of farmers and laborers who have committed suicide have been turning into major protest mobilizations, joined by the grieving women in large numbers. In struggle for compensation, both landless peasants and Dalit widows have been coming together. This long sort of elaboration of the agrarian crisis is very significant to understand who has come from protest, what are the nature of alliances, and where this movement is likely to go. So this is the context. So it's the large farmers facing a crisis, it's the middle and small farmers, it's the Dalit landless laborers, as well as is the non-Dalit small and marginal farmers and agricultural laborers suffering the crisis and sharing some commonality of experience. It is in this context that Punjab has witnessed significant mobilization of small and marginal peasants and agricultural laborers in several parts of the state. The participation and leadership of Dalit women in these mobilization is even more noteworthy. Punjab has been historically, as you all know, a center for peasant struggles, but these have been the bastion of male peasants. Right from the peasant movement under the slogan Pagdi Sambhal Jatta, hold your head high peasant, which was first raised at the mass gathering in Lalpur in 1907, to the mass mobilization of tenants in Patiala and East Punjab States Union, PEPSU, during 1948 and 52 under the Lal Party, to the massive mobilization of 1958-59 against the anti-betterment levy by the Kisan Sabha. The face of the movement has been the male peasant. Today, the face has changed in a significant way. In the recent agrarian mobilizations in Punjab, women, landless Dalit, and marginalized farmers have been integral part of protest. These mobilizations are around issues of rights of Dalit over common village commons, their right to live in the village even when distribution of resources is such that it leaves them no ownership of land they live on until the recognition that Punjab's agrarian crisis, evident in the suicides of peasants, is being borne also by the landless and above all for ending impunity of sexual violence, which women and Dalit in particular endure as caste and patriarchal oppression. This is the context of protests. The coming together in these movements of laboring Dalit women and men, the immiserized small and marginal peasantry, including their women, are opening the possibilities of new solidarities and political alliances of the oppressed. So there is already this context of these alliances being, been in operation for some time. And if you look at the specific struggles, don't have the time to elaborate, but I want to underline, and I borrow here from one of the papers that Nafsharan has done, extensively recording the struggle. The Govindpura struggle in October 2010, Punjab government acquired 806 acres of land in a village in Govindpura in Mansa district for a power project. And there was a great, huge struggle against this acquisition of land. It started in 2010. In 2011, when the administration started demarcating the project site with a strong contingent of police, the people from the village resisted. Women and men were severely beaten. Large arrests were made. The protest and police repression continued for 3 months in the village. In months to follow, young women became the face of the agitation. Men were arrested and sent away to the far-off district jails. But Govindpura women came to picket. They did not retreat even when they were brutally beaten and forced the police to retreat. At the forefront of this struggle were landless Dalit women who had been evicted from houses and small and marginal peasant women who were the new landless. This movement of small peasants and landless laborers continued for 4 years almost, becoming bigger and bigger and a part of other ongoing struggles in the region. In 2014, when another peasant mobilization in Bhatinda was happening, the government of Punjab agreed to pay a monetary compensation of 3 lakhs each for the rehabilitation of the Dalit landless families of Govindpura and provide plots for homesteads. So you can see that for 4 years, the struggle led to compensation. This was the first time that such a compensation was awarded in Punjab following acquisition of village land for a development project. The Bhatinda Morcha, February 12 to 19, thousands of women, men from Dalit landless and landed peasantry came together under the Punjab Khet Mazdoor Union and Bharatiya Kisan Union, Ugraha, and picketed the office of the Deputy Commissioner. Nearly half of the protesters who were, the demands of this protest morcha was important. The demands included release of compensation monies to the families of farmer and landless laborers who had committed suicide, land for homesteads for landless, release of compensation for families in the Govindpura, putting an end to fake auctioning of land reserved for Dalits, implementation of land reforms, and awarding plots to the landless. So you can see the canvas, the coverage of the demands that this protest had. The protest included members of around 5,000 Dalit families who had been waiting for possession of plots of 1 for 25 square yards for homesteads that were allotted to them in 70s. So half of the protesters who gathered in Bhatinda were women who stayed at the protest site for the entire time of the protest. The protest set up a big kitchen, and people from adjoining villages brought flour, pulses, vegetables, milk, etc. Something that you have seen at the Delhi borders now. Interestingly, the experience was so uplifting for those who were there. When the sit-in was lifted, people did not want to leave. This was documented in a famous Punjabi folk song, Bazi Mar Gaya Bhatinde Wala Morcha, which basically means Bhatinda sit-in takes the cake. And we became very popular in Punjab. The lyrics also talk about the reversal of roles where women lead the agitation and men make chapatis. Mard rotiya banan lag gaye. There's also the 2014 struggle of Dalit women in a village called Matoi, which is again very historic. This was around the bidding of land. And there's been a lot of struggles in Punjab around the bidding of land. Particularly the village commons. We'll skip this case. Then there is the Gandhar rape case, January 24, 2014, in the village of Gandhar in Muxar district, where a 14-year Dalit girl was abducted, where she was going to school and gammed by a powerful Jat Sikh landlord of the same village. This was a long struggle that took place. Initially, the medical report was not done properly. Then it was done. Then the FIR was not registered. The police station was gherav. And on February 8th, the January 24th incident took place. The police were forced to file an FIR against the young men of the village. And only then the siege of the police station was lifted. On May 26, hundreds marched to Bhatinda to press for the arrest of the accused. In an unprecedented move, 2,600 women and men, including parents of the survivor, were arrested. Of those arrested, 1,500 were non-Dalits, rural women who were part of the solidarity movement. Between May 27 and June 2012, for 17 days, hundreds of women marched on the streets of Bhatinda every day and mounted pressure on the police to arrest the accused. And finally, on June 12, so the incident took place in January, on June 12, on the same day, the accused were arrested, and the 7 women who were arrested were also released since May. So rape and sexual violence also got integrated or became part of the struggle of the farmers, which included participation by wide spectrum of rural population. What this very sort of quickly spoken history of resistance in Punjab suggests is that the current contemporary movement is not spontaneous. It has a long history in Punjab, and the 3 sort of common questions about who is in the movement: large farmers, traders, small and marginal farmers. That's often they are seen as counterposed against each other. They're all part of the movement, with their own experiences and own background and own understanding about the agrarian crisis. Often the other question is asked about the farmers and laborers, that is the land owning and the landless. As I elaborated, there is a history and they are part of the contemporary movement. And also the larger land question, which is a fundamental question, as I located in the context of the new legislation that have been brought about, has also been internalized through the struggles in Punjab by the farmers and the landless. For the Dalits, it's about the claim to the commons and it's about the land reform. For the small and marginal peasants, it's about the dispossession of their land. So this is the context of the agrarian crisis and the experience of resistance that brings, on which these 3 legislations are, so to say, imposed. So the current agitation in Punjab appears to be largely, on the face of it, a mobilization of farmers, but behind the movement by the farmers, there is a whole history of solidarities of women, of non-Dalit castes, though I'm in no way suggesting that these solidarities and these alliances are not challenging and they don't have their own fissures and contradictions. But the agrarian mobilization in Punjab continues to grapple with the issues of caste and class. But what I'm suggesting to you is that when you look at Delhi and the arrival of farmers and the resistance here, one has to see that there has been a history of building these solidarities over the past many years in the context of the agrarian crisis in Punjab. The farmers' union and the farmer organizations have also emerged in this context. The farmer unions and organizations have realized that in the history of these struggles, that as they contest the power of the state and these alliances between different segments of the rural society often are laden with contradictions and tensions. So other support from other sections of the society has also been engaged with the farmer struggle, with the agrarian struggles in Punjab. So there are alliances with other progressive organizations, whether it be the Students' Union, the Teachers' Union, the Rationalist Society, and other democratic and progressive organizations in the states. This is the context again, as I said, which brings the farmers here. Now, the response of the Indian state to the contestation around the laws has followed the well-known template, terming the farm struggle as misguided, then a conspiracy against the economic interest of the country, and criminalizing the movement. The state response is unraveling the fault lines of Indian democracy and India's development paradigm. So this is my general understanding that it is through the process of the movement and the response of the state which is creating this understanding amongst the protesters, creating this understanding within the movement by when the state criminalizes the movement, that how the farmer struggle is linked with the larger democratic struggle. When the state says that the farmers are misguided and it's a conspiracy against the economic interests of the country, this is a learning for the protesters, this is a learning for the agitation to suggest that there is a deeper economic interest which is being served here, which is interest of a small segment of the society, which is the large dominant corporations, and it is not meant to serve the larger interests of everyday sort of citizens or the small and marginal farmers and agricultural laborers of Punjab. The hubris of the process has also not been lost on anyone, especially the farmers. So that is the second context in which the movement is being sustained. Poets and cultural activists of Punjab have been very actively engaged. Surjit Patar, the celebratory Punjabi poet, who returned his Padma Shri in support of the protesting farmers, in a recent long poem, wrote, "Ek gal niri enni hi nahi." It's not only about hard labor never hurts. It's the indifference from neglect and apathy springs this mighty indignation. Change has to happen, but it is also the responsibility of those who are entrusted with policy making to ensure that those on the margin are not trampled in the process. So these are the two pillars which is sustaining the movement. One, the indignity with which the farmers have been treated. The other, that even if the change is to be articulated, it cannot be articulated or it cannot be implemented by trampling the rights of the poor and the marginalized. So when farmers from Punjab and Haryana reached the border of border of Delhi in a peaceful convoy, they were met with barricades, and all of us have seen what it was. There's an interesting anecdote that is documented. When they were stopped, a farmer was heard, the policeman said, "You don't know Delhi is facing the pandemic." A farmer was heard replying, "Didn't government know when they passed these ordinances without any consultation in the middle of pandemic? Who asked them to pass these laws during the pandemic?" The police officer again said, "There are 101 ways of getting your point across to the governments. Why did you come to Delhi?" The astonished farmer replies, "You tell us 2 ways of getting our point across and keep the remaining 99 to yourself. Just tell us 2 ways of telling the government that we do not want these laws, and they say they will benefit us." This is what sustains the movement. This is the context in which the experience of the farmers' struggles in Punjab, the deep impact of the agrarian crisis of Punjab, and everyday experience of indignation and everyday experience of hubris and everyday experience of suggesting that the policy change will be made at the cost of the small and marginalized is something which is sustaining the movement. This movement has come with a lot of preparation. Just to give a small example, don't have the time, that Punjab is the only state which translated all the 3 legislations in Punjabi. For 2 months, they were read in every village by every subgroup of farmers. There was a deep preparation. So between July and November, the farmers in Punjab and the agricultural laborers in Punjab and the Dalit women in Punjab were on the streets, were holding the morchas. I'm sure you know that while the morcha is going on in Delhi, at 41 locations in Punjab, the dharnas and the morchas are going. These are the toll plazas, these are the shopping malls, and so on and so forth. Since August, the dharna sites or the morcha sites are continuous to be there in Punjab, along with large number of farmers knocking at the doors of the Delhi government. The experience of farmers in Punjab clearly tells them that they do not have the option of transporting farm produce to lucrative markets. They don't have the means to do so. They have experienced it through their livings. And farmers constantly cite, if you visit if you visit the farmers protest site, constantly refer to the APMC system in Bihar and the experience about Bihar. And it's an interesting dynamics because the same Punjabi community, which didn't see Bihari labor they called them bhaiyas and did not see them with great affection, now see affinity with the Bihari laborer because the experience of Punjab is likely to be similar for them as the Bihari laborers have experienced in the last many years. The demand charter of the peasantry is also broad-based as a result of this experience of the agrarian crisis and the experience of protest. So if you look at the charter, it includes linkages with other segments of the society. All farm unions are demanding the unconditional repeal of these 3 recent agriculture acts, the Electricity Amendment Bill, but also they are seeking the implementation of universal public distribution system throughout the country and connecting their struggle to the food security. They also point out that once food grain becomes a commodity to be traded under the market conditions, the already crumbling PDS will collapse, starving the urban and the rural poor. If you look at what they have been doing at the sit-in, what kind of issues they have been raising, it's not only about the 3 farm laws. If you look at the days that have been marked, 10 December, Human Rights Day, Youth Day, 18 January, Women's Farmer Day, Chandrasekhar Azad's Martyrdom Day, Ravidas' birthday, Guru Gobind Singh's Martyrdom Day, Pagadi Samal Jatta marking that day, Babbar Akali movement. So if you look at the significance of each of these, it's very clear that everyday resistance at the Delhi borders and the experience and history of resistance in Punjab has opened up 2 issues to farmers. One, it has opened up the development paradigm. Why rural youth is not getting employment, why perennial labor experiences the conditions that it experiences, 7,000 informal jobs, why youth is getting reduced to a reserve army. So the connect between the agrarian crisis and unemployment is very clear to the protesters. The other issue that the protesters have experienced, particularly which has got sharpened after January 26th, is this whole thing about right to protest. They were already marking these days before, the Human Rights Day and the others, and seeking those who have been in the jail that they be released, the people who represent civil liberties and democratic right activists. But on December 10th, and the right to peaceful assembly of people. But after January 26th, the connection has been made even more obvious. The NIA notices, the arrests of sympathizers, the calls from special cell, the toolkit case, the attempt to vilify the whole movement has further brought in the connect between the farmer struggle and the safeguarding of democracy. So the hollowing out of democracy that has been going on for quite some time has been now understood by the farmers and the farmers movement, and through the farmers movement, perhaps by large segments of the Indian society, I think very clearly. The government started it with the guerrilla attack on demonetization, then the bad implementation of GST, Then the violent uprooting of lives and livelihood of migrant workers with the imposition of the most severe lockdown at a 4 hours notice, negative growth, unprecedented recession, massive unemployment with soaring stock market. All of this combined with the ideological priorities of CAA, cow slaughter, love jihad, mandir, building of the central vista, and so on and so forth. So there is this political discourse. There's quite this discomfort and distress with this political discourse, and the farmers' movement has brought this discomfort and distress more out in the open. The democracy that was being hollowed out is being challenged by the farmers. In my understanding, what was being attempted by this hollowing out of democracy was to construct a new notion of socially just. That is, in other words, redefine, sabka saath, sabka vikas. So the notion of socially just and notion of power was being reconstructed. I think the farmers' movement has brought back both the notion of socially just and economic just and the notion of power right up front, in front of the country. So the attempt to hollow out the democracy by taking out concepts like fairness, for taking out the notion that the policy has to be for the last person in the line, as Gandhi had suggested, the idea that the power is not meant to benefit the poorest and the marginalized, but the instrumental notion of use of power, the idea that the dissent has to be systematically criminalized, and all the time name calling and discrediting the opposition. All those have been very clearly understood and deconstructed by the farmers' movement and through the farmers' movement by, I think, the larger sections of the Indian society. And I think, as I think Amit Bhadri put it in one of these recent articles, the attempt to corporatize agriculture and via corporatizing agriculture, corporatizing Indian democracy and corporatizing our constitutional rights is now being fundamentally challenged by the farmer struggle. And I think the challenge for us is to deconstruct this development paradigm in all its layers, to peel out all the layers, and at the same time also to make this connection with safeguarding democracy and safeguarding the farmers' rights as two sides of the same coin. And the more rich we make this conversation, the deeper will be the impact of the farmer struggle. I'll stop here. Sorry, gone. I think, yeah, 10 minutes more. 4 o'clock was, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was wonderful, Atul. I'm going to pass it over to our research officer, Dr. Rachel Varghese, to take the discussion forward, please. Please coordinate that, Rachel.
May I request all of you to please type in your queries and comments to the speaker in the chat box. We'll take them up one by one. Shall we wait for a minute for the questions to come?
There are no questions.
Please type your questions into the chat box or comments. We are not allowing people to speak out the questions because that takes longer. We will read out the questions.
We have a comment.
Yeah.
It's from Anuradha Banerjee. It's not a question, but a comment rather. Thank you, Dr. Sood, for actually pointing it out how the farmer protests have a historicity to them. We have a query from Meenakshi Sharma. Do these laws have any implications on MSP?
I mean, if I were to convert that question and say, does this movement have any implications for MSP? And I would say yes, there'll be strong implications of this movement for MSP, because now there's an overwhelming understanding that the limited application of MSP that Indian agriculture had, in the last 20 to 30 years, is actually now the farmers are seeking far more generalized implementation of the MSP framework. So it's not about the 23 crops, but they're talking about, whatever 100 plus crops in which they're seeking MSP. So I think MSP has been much better understood as a result of this movement, even by the farmers and of course by the larger citizenry. So, I see actually the movement providing a lot of learning in multiple directions, and not only in terms of how policy worked in agriculture, in order to understand how these laws will get implemented on that sort of landscape, but also in terms of what we need to seek to overcome the challenges of the agrarian crisis that has been produced by policy. So MSP, of course, the government is claiming that there'll be no difference in the MSP. If you just look at, actually I skipped that part, but if you look at the government actions in the last 2 years, none of them actually convince you of what the government is wanting to claim, that it is not there to support the private interests, but rather to look after farmers' interest. If you look at the increase in the MSP during the Rabi crop, it was very marginal. If you look at the privatization of the FCI that started long back, it is happening at a big scale. There are major agreements with one of the major corporate houses that are being named in this struggle for warehousing facilities of the FCI. So there's a privatization of the warehousing of the FCI that is happening. So if you look at the budgetary allocation in this budget, you can very clearly see that agriculture sector, the state does not want to intervene. So the overall policy under the neoliberal era, where agriculture is treated as a residual sector, essentially a sector which subsidizes accumulation, which facilitates growth in the manufacturing and the service sector, that orientation of agriculture continues, irrespective of the resistance that the farmers are raising. And the fact that the government is persisting with its own approach, that's exactly the reason why government is not willing to concede the withdrawal of the laws. Because if it withdraws the law, this principle of understanding that they've been promoting, will get challenged. So MSP will get compromised to the extent it exists. As I discussed, right now MSP will be supported. You might have two markets, but ultimately the private markets would take over. I mean, if you talk to the farmers there, they say, sir, isme to koi mushkil nahi hai. Do you know about Jio? The farmers are saying, whatever happened to Jio will happen with us. So, there is initially there'll be an enticement, later on there'll be an isolation, or later on there'll be costs of, the prices will not be offered of the same kind. So, but as I said, I see more in terms of the positive out of it, that the layers of MSP and MSP's implementation and the challenges in MSP are now much better understood at the ground level, which is something that needs to be celebrated. And this is creating the demand where people are saying, the farmers are saying, not only withdraw the 3 farm laws, but also bring a new legislation for the MSP.
Thank you, sir. Our next query is from K. Sharadamani. Will the growing protests result in changing elections against BJP in West Bengal and other states going to poll soon?
That depends on us. The farmers have done their bit. I mean, the question is that, the movement has spread to other parts of the states, other parts of the country. But, to the extent that it will have electoral implications, it depends on other civil society actors in the political parties. I mean, I think that the consensus of pushing private business in agriculture that existed in the mainstream parties has also got broken. Because if you want to reach out to people now, I don't think it's only, Congress and, other mainstream parties will be compelled to look at their agriculture strategy. If they are not going to do that, then they are also going to get as marginalized as the ruling party. So I think it is compelled reconsideration of how agriculture is to be seen in policy. At least that's my hope. And if that's the kind of debate then that we open up, I think it will have good implications in the elections. But it all depends on how the campaign brings these issues to the fore. The attempt will be, my understanding is that there is a jugalbandi here between the economic discourse and the political discourse. So the other side of the jugalbandi, that is the political discourse, will try and keep this economic discourse that we have been talking about since the last 1 hour at the background. And at the forefront will be the political discourse that I talked about. Love jihad, cow slaughter, Ram Mandir, and the rest. And within that, the economic discourse will be hidden. The farmers have brought the economic discourse up front. And I think the challenge for the mainstream political parties is to accept this challenge and deal with the economic discourse up front and give out their view. If they give a position of their own, then I think the ruling party will also be compelled to engage with that debate. If they don't, then the ruling party will be able to take over the debate in the direction that they have been able to take in the recent years. About impact on the declining secular fabric of India. Is the movement having influence on the declining secular fabric of India? I don't know. I mean, it's a complex situation in Punjab. They're attempting to communalize it. But I think the farmers' movement, the agriculture laborers, the Dalit women, and the large number of civil society activists understand the challenge. So, I think the question is in context of the divide between Sikhs and Punjabi in Punjab. We'll have to be alert on this. I don't think at the moment it has much reach, but the ruling classes are known to use these crises to their benefit at the cost of people. And so they could convert this crisis into destroying the secular fabric of India, and that has to be resisted. I want to say one thing on this, though, that the resistance to the secular fabric is very clearly understood by the farmers' movement. Their resistance to the decline of the secular fabric is because the agenda of upliftment of the poor cannot be pushed ahead if the secular fabric is threatened. It is not because there is a global conspiracy against Indian nation state. So the resistance to fighting communal forces is because it's the biggest challenge for progressive political forces to move ahead. That's the challenge that's the framework in which the farmers have understood it.
The next query is by Lozan Kumba. Where do you see the direction of farmers' protests moving in the future?
I would see that the alliances that they are building, number one, so across different segments of the rural economy, farmers, small and marginal farmers, agricultural laborers, Dalit agricultural laborers, Dalit women. So this large spectrum of rural population. One is that potential that I see, and second, I think they pushing the larger discourse of linking the economic crisis or the agrarian crisis with the other kinds of economic crisis. So the connect between labor laws and farm laws. If you're going to push, my argument was that the farm laws have been brought about in order to create this reserve army. Now, where is this reserve army going to go? Into non-agrarian sector. What is the legislative framework in the non-agrarian sector? The labor laws. So in the service sector and the manufacturing sector, you are restricting the capacity of labor to organize itself. You are increasing the precarity of employment there. You are reducing every job, if you get a job, that is, to only 7,000 rupees. And the rest would be part of this reserve army, which you do not even have a promise of a job. So I think this connect between the two legislations is also a connect between the commonality of forces which bring crisis for the poor and the marginalized across the spectrum. And I think that's the other direction in which this movement has the potential. So alliances within the rural areas, as well as connections outside the rural with the non-rural segments, particularly of the poor and the marginalized.
The next query is from Anuradha Banerjee. Do you think that women equally driving the farmers' protest would lead to women being actually realized as actual active stakeholders in the agrarian economy? since women have mostly been invisible even as farmers. My comment is, though, based on limited fieldwork opinion.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. They have been invisible, but as I gave you examples, they're increasing their visibility. And the impact of that visibility is that you can see the presence in the protest sites here as well. You can also see their presence in the leadership. Of course, it's unequal. I mean, the challenges again are huge, but they have brought the issues of the women farmers to the forefront. The issues of Dalit women agricultural laborers have been brought to the forefront. And also, I think there is an acknowledgement, at least in the segment of the farmers, that that women farmers and women agricultural laborers have to be brought in to the larger agrarian struggles and to be seen as part of the larger agrarian economy. So I think there is a progress on that front, whether and more not in terms of not only in terms of the protest that is going on, but I think in the long run, I think it will have a huge implication for how the agrarian crisis is seen and how the agrarian struggles are led on what issues. I mean, I gave small examples. I mean, these are of how even movements on sexual violence and rape, and in these movements, how the larger sections of peasantry have participated across caste, across class. So these alliances and solidarities have been built, though I confess at a very limited level in a very localized context. But here are rich experiences, and I think it's the job of people who study in these areas to study these areas. They bring out the realities and share with the world outside Punjab, because much of what is happening in Punjab is not known outside Punjab because of the material that is being produced is being written only in the local language, and nothing is available in either Hindi or English. So I see hope again there.
Thank you. We have two queries from Professor G. Arunima. I'll read them out together. I want to hear a bit more about the changing size of holdings and large land holdings increasing, and yet the possibility of vibrant farmer unions being able to function. So isn't this reversal of forms and structure of land holdings a cause of concern for unions? And the next query is,
let me take one by one, so that I just want to read it as well. Changing size of land holdings and large land increasing, and yet possibility of vibrant farm being able to. No, but unions. I mean, unions. Unions are building solidarities with each other. Just again another example. If you go to one of these farmers' rally in Punjab, in one of those agriculture mandis, after the end of the meeting, you would find trolleys full of grain, which would be left, which will be available after the meeting for the agriculture laborer who has lost his wage for that day to carry a sack of food grain back home. So this is the extent to which people are seeing solidarities. So those who have food grain or who have wheat are sharing their wheat with the agricultural laborers, because they realize that having come to the protest, the laborer is unable to get his daily wage on that day. Even if you see the Delhi Morcha, lot of sharing is happening. Of course, in proportional terms, and if you look at, there are differences. I mean, there is a component of the discourse which is very big pharma, male-centric and all of that. I mean, there is a component of the movement like that which is very aggressive in its response to things. But there is the other current as well in the movement, and I think this is a struggle which will get resolved as the movement progresses. The heartening part is that both forces exist rather than one force being dominant. So reversal of forms, I don't know, Arunima. I mean, they are
in the sense that so that's the dilemma, isn't it? Which is that on the one hand, you have a situation where those who are big landowners are obviously increasing their presence and power and economic
Sure.
ways in which they can, sort of give this a certain direction. Right. So there is a kind of
But
immiseration.
numbers are against them, na? Because Punjab and India also is basically a small marginal peasant economy.
Right.
So
But the argument you were structuring, which I thought was actually fascinating, is this idea that you actually are getting this large landholding kind of shift that's taking place instead of sub-incubation.
yeah. Oh, but that's because reverse tendency is happening. Reverse
So
tendencies. Yeah, but that reverse tendency essentially means for now, if you exclude the impact of the new bills, is essentially that is how marginal farmers are surviving or small farmers are surviving. So if I have 2 hectares, then I take 2 hectares of yours, 2 hectares of another person, then I make it 6 or 7, and then I make it viable. So I make it viable by reverse tendency. So the large one is not taking from the small one, but the reverse is also happening. That sort of, the middle one, so to say, is also putting together small units to make it one. And that's how they are surviving. But they understand the dynamics of the crisis very well, even though are, eking out a living. And as one of the farm leaders said, that don't look at us as they said, we are the ones, hum aapke annadata hain, we bring, we grow food. Don't treat us that we will be with torn clothes and we will have nothing to eat. We also have aspirations like everyone else. We want to do good weddings of our children. We want a good house. We want few whatever comforts in our house, and we have every right to aspire this because we are owners of huge wealth in terms of land. The problem is that you have made us poor. You have made us poor and you made us vulnerable because of your bad policies. This was said in one of the lectures with the farmers leaders on the Delhi border, and I thought it's quite sense. So therefore the farmers need not be seen as someone who's completely down and out, but this is something that because this is a very now discourse happening amongst a section of the population saying it is a rich farmers movement. It's not it's not going to be. That's not true. It's a movement. That's why I highlighted that it is a movement which has all sections of society. And like the society itself, the movement will have to deal with these conflicts and contradictions. For every occasion, how to resolve it, what stance to take, what argument to build. I mean, so to include PDS as one of the demands was a challenge. All farmers' unions are still not upholding the PDS demand, but some farmer unions are. But the pressure is there. Similarly, the redistribution of or the giving the rights to the Dalits of the commons is again something that all farmers union may not be supporting, but still very much part of the discourse of the farmers movement. So this is something that will get. What I'm seeing is that rather than us looking at saying where it will go, I think it has immense potential in all directions.
No, I was just interested also in terms of the ways in which the unions themselves, their characters are changing. There's clearly a kind of shift taking place on the ground of how to unionize and what to unionize and what the sort of basic common factors should be. I mean,
compared to Punjab and non-Punjab, Punjab Kisan unions essentially are unions which have come up, which have fought local struggles, in districts and local areas, dealing with the agrarian crisis. While if you look at the other unions, the other representative frameworks, they are not essentially originated in the context of the crisis. They have not evolved in the context of the crisis. They also have some other identities going around which they have come together, be it region specific, location specific, caste specific, and so on and so forth. So they are raising the issues of farmers. They're talking about the agrarian crisis, but they have not got constructed through the process of dealing with the agrarian crisis. That is the reason you have 32 unions in the Sanyukt Kisan Morcha. Well, why Punjab has so many subgroups? Why, but it is because the struggles have been fought at the local level consistently over the last many years. And this consistent confrontation with the state and with the policy makers has created this, large pool of, and look, the other side of it is that though 32 are there, their coordination is fairly good. The reason is because they are dealing with a similar animal. They have a common experience, so they can understand and communicate with each other. And I think they have a great deal of wisdom that they have not tried to merge.
Right.
All they have done is a coordination committee. So if you have common goals, all you need is coordination. They're not getting into the business that how do you see 200 years from now, how do you see India? They're not debating those issues. They are not resolving the deep theoretical polemical issues through this movement. It's very concrete that they are dealing with agrarian crisis and a response to the agrarian crisis and how they look at the Indian state.
Absolutely.
And they have great deal of sharing in that. That's again another rich part of this movement, which on the pattern of which I would say other segments of the society can perhaps draw some inspiration and draw some lessons. Present from.
Shall I read out the next?
Yeah, I read Arunima's next question. Yeah, I don't know. You would know about Arunima more. I mean, the citizens movement. I mean, initially it worked in the favors of the farm, in the favor of the farmer. I mean, I would say because they kept their this autonomous thing. But with the linkage with saving democracy and saving saving the farm, so to say, getting connected so very clearly, I feel also that there is a greater solidarities need to be built beyond the farmers, beyond the the rural population, and that has been lacking. It hasn't come. I mean, one simple way I always thought that if farmers have been stopped at the border, why didn't Delhi reach the borders? I mean, but that did not happen. I mean, the kind one would sort of,
Exactly.
think that hasn't happened. Initially, as everyone said, it was in the favor because the movement could focus on its strengths and focus on its goals. But if you notice after 26 January, this has changed. The participation of the non-farmers organization in the farmer struggle and their sharing of platforms has increased.
Oh, that's nice to know. Okay.
Yeah, well, because you can see it because what happened on the Ghazipur border, how political representatives came there. Earlier, no one was allowed. Yeah, you're right. Political parties representatives were allowed. Of course, the one in opposition, but they were allowed to come there. The police did not let them meet the farmers, but the farmers allowed them to come. So there is some bit of sharing that is happening. And I've also heard some of the farm leaders talking about saying that, Punjab and Haryana, we need not hold any more meetings and rallies. We need to go and move out and look beyond. And they're talking about the states that are going under elections. So I think there is an acknowledgement of making this linkage. How far they will be successful, I think it is crucially dependent on that the mainstream opposition parties need to come out with their understanding of the agrarian crisis and way out.
Absolutely.
And if they are distinctly different from what the Indian government and Indian state is doing currently, that will bring the agriculture and economic discourse right up front. And therefore, compel people to make those linkages. But if that does not happen, and if the debate on the farm crisis and the agrarian crisis is iffy on the part of the Congress and on other mainstream parties, then the ruling party will have its way in terms of overtaking the discourse.
We have a comment from 𝐾.𝐈𝐒. In Kerala, there was a big dharna in late December in front of ration shops in many parts of the state, linking the farmers' protests with PDS. Also, Kasaragod to Vidinyam Adani Port Tractor Rally. Of course, there were only a handful of tractors.
Of course, I mean, Kerala is the leader in this, so it's a welcome information. I mean, I didn't know this, but absolutely, I mean, why not? But so-called not understood by others as and seen outside Punjab as a rich peasant state, the sharing in Punjab or a commonality of goal in Punjab in terms of the PDS demand, I find it quite encouraging. In fact, the labor unions, etc., could have joined the farmers' protest on that ground. There is enough information available to say that if the MSP was taken away and if the government procurement is taken away, there is no way that PDS will be implemented. So MSP and PDS are two sides of the same coin. And the argument that there are not enough resources again, some of our friends have done some interesting pieces on that to say what is the nature of transactions that take place in stock market, and what just not even 1% of tax on a stock market transaction could bring about the necessary resources for the MSP purchase as well as the provisioning through PDS. But this hasn't happened in a big way.
Thank you, sir. We have come to the end of our questions and comments. On behalf of I'm sorry, there's one query. So shall I take that up as well and then bring the session to an end?
Yeah, sure.
It's from Pritham Datta. Agricultural products, unlike manufactured items, have smaller catchment areas and low shelf life. So do you think that the idea of a nationwide market for farmers' production could be a viable output as described in this bill?
Well, as you said, Pritham, it's described, but as I showed to you, there is no possibility of one market. In fact, the bill claims to resolve the fragmentation of the market, but it constructs another fragmentation of the market. So really, there is no nationwide market that is going to be built. And that seems to be not the intent of the bill either. In the absence of regulation, in the absence of other provisions that I talked about in terms of, e-trading and so on and so forth, clearly the attempt is not to have a nationwide market for farmers' production. So that description might be there in the bill. I mean, in fact, one of the tasks that we need to do is to show how the claims of the bill do not match with the provisioning of the bill. I think that's an important point people have done excellent work on that. So I think this would be the question that you have asked is an example of that the claims of the bill mismatch with the provisioning of the bill in terms of creating one national market. The idea, of course, is this. Ultimately, they want to hand over agriculture to agribusiness and processed food and so on and so forth. So, yeah, that's the intent. But
thank you, sir. We have come to the end of the session. On behalf of the KCHR, I wish to thank Professor Atul Sood again for being a part of our intervention series and for that deeply insightful contextualization of the ongoing farm struggles. I also wish to thank all of you who have participated in the program for your queries and comments. We look forward to seeing you in our next academic event. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have come to an end of the session.
Very much, everyone, for being patient to listen, and thank you for asking me to come. All of you, thanks.
Thank you, sir.